Another one is temperature. So that's a really kind of obscure one. That's not something, it's not a chemical being added, it's not really something you can touch, but returning water back into the ecosystem at the correct temperature. This is incredibly important for organisms living in that ecosystem. If organisms are living in a cold ecosystem but then get shocked with warm water, it can actually kill them. So we try to make sure that we can lower the temperature. Typically it's because we made the temperature higher. We want to lower it before it gets into the ecosystem. So the example I have are these things. You've probably seen these before. We have them here in Maryland, and if you're actually looking out for them, you can notice them quite a bit. These, or that white smoke, isn't smoke at all. It's not carbon dioxide, it's not anything. That is just water. It's water vapor. These are what are called cooling towers. So again, that's cooling towers. Oh, you're not going to write. Okay, cooling towers. So cooling towers are found typically when you're looking at coal-powered plants or nuclear power plants. The way energy is created, it usually requires boiling water. And that water that's being boiled usually comes from the environment. So the water comes in, it gets boiled, that steam then turns an engine, or turns a turbine that creates electricity. But now that it's steam, it starts condensing and turns back into a liquid, but it's really hot liquid. You know, tons time warmer than it was inside that river that this coal-powered plant got it from. So the solution to that is building these cooling towers. So the way the cooling towers work is that the water that's from inside of this plant right here, the water goes into the walls of this cooling tower and literally gets sprayed into the openness. So this is like an open cylinder. So you have all these hoses inside of the wall that are just spraying the water inside of this air. And if you've ever been through a mist machine, you know it feels a lot cooler inside of a mist because you have all this air interacting with the air, all of this water interacting with the air, and it cools down that water. So the reason these cooling towers exist is because they have an NPDES permit. They can't release that water warm back into the environment. Instead, they spray it, it cools down as it mixes with air, it falls to the bottom of these cooling towers, and then gets collected and then returned to the environment. So as you can see, quite an investment to build these just to cool down the temperature of that water. Now this video that just popped up, quick little video showing you the inside of these cooling towers. You can kind of see those hoses, but it gives you an idea of the scale of these towers and gives you a better visualization of what's actually happening. So go ahead and pause here and click on this link that is popping up right now. So really cool, this huge open cylinder where all that water is going to spray into. So how does this relate back to the human water cycle? It's like I kind of went on this tangent. You know, we take water from the environment, we run it through a drinking water filtration plant, we use it, number one way again, using it in toilets, and then we flush it, and then there's laws to make sure that the stuff that we flush doesn't go directly into the environment. But how do we do that? And that's where wastewater treatment plants come in. Wastewater treatment plants are taking all of our wastewater, whether it's toilet water, shower water, dishwasher water, it's taking all that water and they treat it. You and I, we don't have to get an NPDES. Like, there's no permitting system you haven't learned about yet. We don't have to get it. The wastewater treatment plant that your city or your county or your state runs, they take care of the NPDES. On their NPDES are a couple different things. The one that I want to show to you, total suspended solids. So suspended solids being the key word there. Just how much stuff is in that water. How many nutrients, looking at both phosphorus and nitrogen. Looking at how much oxygen is in that water. how much chlorine is in that water. This is going to be because the wastewater treatment plant cleans it with chlorine, but they can't just put that chlorine into the environment. They need to make sure they take it back out. Pretty similar to us when we're getting our drinking water. Fecal coliform, so this would be E. coli as an example. Again, we don't want to release that into the environment. We want to kill it, just like with our drinking water. So the goal is really to make the water that goes back into the environment a pretty high standard. It's not as high a standard as our drinking water, but it's still a pretty high standard. We're not just, oh, let's put it through a filter and then release it. We actually are trying to actively clean it. In Montgomery County, we'll see this on the next slide, but our wastewater is coming from, or is being handled by the WSSC, the Washington Sanitation Suburban Commission. This video shows you an overview of what a wastewater treatment plant looks like. Now with our drinking water plants, we talked about the different techniques that they do in order to get the stuff out of our water to make it drinkable. They pretty much do the same thing at a wastewater treatment plant. So if you want to review, remember there was coagulation, there was flocculation, sedimentation, we had filtration and chlorination. They do a lot of those things here as well. So go ahead and pause here and watch this video from WSSC looking at one of their wastewater treatment plants before moving on. So here in Germantown, or let me actually backtrack. In the Washington Suburban Sanitation Commission, oh, I messed it up. The Washington Sanitation and Suburban Commission, in their district, they have about 7 different wastewater treatment plants. The one that Germantown is served by is the Seneca Wastewater Treatment Plant. So to give you an idea, here's where the school is, and honestly, right down the street, or this is where the Germantown school is, I should say. Right down the street is the Seneca Wastewater Treatment Plant. They clean the water, and then their water goes into the Great Seneca Creek. So it's going literally in your backyard. But again, it is treated first. It isn't actually going into your backyard, and it's not human waste going into your backyard. It's treated waste. So you can see it pretty nearby. If you're in Rockville, more than likely going here as well. Tacoma Park is going to be served by a different one. So just keep that in mind, like where this wastewater treatment plant is. Remember, our drinking water plant was off of the Potomac River. Now this is for people who are on public systems. So you have a sewer, you pay a sewer bill or a water bill. Some people, about a quarter of our country, is served by a septic system. And a septic system is something that an individual household has. Now, although they don't have a wastewater treatment plant that their waste is going to, this doesn't mean they need an NPDES. Remember, when it came to ground systems, that was the Safe Drinking Water Act. So the Safe Drinking Water Act is going to be what is kind of regulating the rules for a septic tank. If you're not familiar with a septic tank, so here is the home. All of their wastewater goes down into this tank. This tank is underground. It's not far underground, maybe a couple feet underground. And this is where all the waste just kind of sits and stays there. And it sits and stays there and kind of collects. There's typically a lot of bacteria in a septic tank whose whole job is to actually break down the waste that is in that septic tank. The water that is kind of left over is at the top, whereas all of that gross stuff is at the bottom. There is a pipe coming out of the top so that all the water can go out of that pipe, but all that heavy stuff and murky stuff kind of stays at the bottom. The water flows out and it goes into something called a drain field, and that's what you can see here. With this drain field, essentially the water comes out here into these different pipes that have holes in them, and the water just enters the ecosystem. And we let the ecosystem kind of clean that waste. So it does a little bit of preliminary waste inside the septic tank, but for the most part, it's the environment. This pee, this soapy water, all of that is going to come out of these tubes, and it's going to sink down. And as it sinks down, it's going through rocks, it's going through sand, there's different microbes, and there'll be environmental processes that clean that before it even hits the groundwater. So again, you don't need an NPDES for it. More than likely, if you're living in a city or even a large town, you don't have a septic system. These are more older towns or homes that are further spread apart. But just kind of keep them in mind as well, because they have wastewater too. It's just their wastewater is treated differently. So again, as a summary, the Clean Water Act is really watching out for our surface waters. And the reason we care about that is because, we get 60% of our drinking water from surface water. The Clean Water Act is working with the states to identify impaired waters. And once we know they're impaired, we can set a limit, that TMDL. With that limit in place, we can tell companies, yes, with your NPDES permit, you can release 10 pounds. You can release 5 pounds. No, you can't, because we already have too much pollution in this river or in this stream or pond. But keep in mind that Clean Water Act's not protecting everything. If it's an artificial pond, it's not protected. If it's an irrigation canal, it's not protected. So it's not protecting everything. It's also not protecting things like septic tanks. But septic tanks are still monitored, and they are still regulated. But again, that's Safe Drinking Water Act, because we're trying to protect that groundwater in the Safe Drinking Water Act.